Be seated. Well, we've been following along in Lent in the Gospel of Mark, and now we sort of leap over and grab this little story from the Gospel of John. 12th chapter, 20 through 33 is our Gospel reading. There was a festival going on. They were getting ready for Passover. So we're at the end of John. This is John's leading up to the Passion. This is the week of, which will begin for us next week. Will be Palm Sunday, the entry into Jerusalem. But we find in this, the very first thing is, as I try to tackle this story, is how Jesus continually is brought one thing and then responds in this totally other way. So here's what's happened, and I just want to point out, this is the emergence of the first church bureaucracy. The guy talks to Philip. Philip has to talk to Andrew. Philip and Andrew have to talk to Jesus. And then the boss just goes off in this big speech. A soliloquy in response to this guy wants to meet you. So we see in John, and I only point this out because John is not a newspaper account of Jesus' life. It is a theological telling of Jesus' meaning and the experiences John had. And so, I don't want to burst anybody's bubble, but Jesus may not have said exactly this in response to the guy wants to meet you. But John wanted to say, if he wants to meet me, he's come really late to the party. Because I'm about to be glorified, the Father's about to be glorified, and nobody's going to want to see it. And so, in a sense, what John says is this guy shows up in the middle or at the climactic scenes of Jesus' life and ministry and the meaning of his life and ministry. So his response then is to tell that simple parable that we hear over and over, which is, unless a seed falls into the earth and dies, there can be no fruitfulness. And so I think I said this before, but you get one seed in the ground, and a head of grain, wheat, whatever grain they were growing, has hundreds. But the seed no longer exists that sprouted the plant. It's gone. Now, if you dig it up early enough, you'll find the husks of the seed where it's broken open. But in general, that will, by the time it fruits, that will be dissolved and back into the earth. So he points out that out of that kind of death comes life, because the life never actually ends. The life of the seed doesn't stop. The form of the seed ceases to exist, and its fulfillment has come forth. Now, I don't know about y'all, but it doesn't matter how much science they tried to teach me in school. The idea that you can stick this little hard thing into the ground and warm it up and get it wet, and it turns into something big with something you can eat on it, is a mystery to me. It's as much a mystery to me that happens, that somebody can make a picture and sound come out of this square thing on my wall. It's all a mystery to me. Now, there are people who can explain it, right? They can explain the processes. Obviously, they can control the mechanics of transmission of radio signals and so forth. But that it's all even possible is where God comes in. And so as he makes this response and he says the thing that, we hear it over and over. Jesus must have said this because it shows up everywhere in all the Gospels. If you want to gain your life, you must lose it. And then he tells that parable. And so the parable says you'll lose your form, but not your life. The life force is what becomes eternal. The husks, the seeds, the forms, the manifestations that we call ourselves, no different than a seed made up of the same stuff, subject to the same physical laws, but with conscience and consciousness. Then he goes into the prayer. The prayer in which we find some remnant that allows us to identify with the human Jesus. Now my soul is troubled. He's just said all this, and it's almost like, have you ever said something and then you hear yourself having said it and you go, oh my gosh. It had to come out your mouth before your brain actually realized what you were into. Well, some of us are like that. We process verbally. Others get it all worked out and then they talk. That's probably a better plan, but so forth. So I am. But so Jesus, as he said all this, and then all of a sudden he says, this is a little troublesome for me. So he goes into prayer. This is really trouble. And Jesus goes into prayer. Now, it's a really fancy prayer because John had time to work on it. But, Father, glorify your name. He says, rather than, he said, what I really could pray is, Lord, save me from this hour. Which we know from the Garden of Gethsemane, he prays that again. If this cup can pass, if you've got a plan B, I would really like you to pull it on out now. But your will be done. So we see that Jesus is at the moment, the human Jesus is at that point of choice. Does he save his own skin, or does he save the world? He can't do both. So it comes, an answer of thunder, an answer where maybe it was angels, and he makes this statement, the ruler of this world will be driven out, and when I'm lifted from the earth, I will draw all people to myself. And John says this was to indicate the kind of death he was to die, which lifted him up from the earth. Referencing back to, last week or the week before, whenever we had the serpent story. The serpents came out and bit everybody because they were being grumpy. And they put the bronze serpent on the pole. Now this is a very ancient kind of magic medicine in the primitive world. You can reverse something by doing something. It's sort of like if you get poisoned, you take more poison to stop it. Or if we were to think in modern terms, you give yourself a dead virus and your body produces immune. Does anybody know how that really happens? Another mystery, right? So all these mysteries of life, we have our way. It seems to work better than their way. But Jesus is referencing, again, this story from the wilderness and Moses, that he's going to be the one who's going to be lifted up. Only this time, anyone who looks upon him in the whole world will be saved from their separation from God. You would just hear the word sin, if you could kind of mostly put behavioral bad stuff just, misbehavior stuff on the shelf. And when you hear that word sin, hear my alienation from God, the things that keep me separate, the doubt, the indifference, well, let's face it, sometimes I know what's right, but I want to do what's wrong. Even Paul said that. I know what's right, but my flesh wants to do what's wrong. Who's going to save me from this body of death, he says. And then he names, glory to God, for the victory is in Jesus. I'm paraphrasing. So his lifted up, and our gazing upon it. We could go have a class on theories of the atonement. That's a thing you do at seminary. What is it that Jesus actually accomplished that saved us? So one of those is that simply to see Jesus take on the ultimate act of human sacrifice, which is to give his life for the sake of others. Later in John 15, he says that. No greater love is this than a man would lay down his life for another. But the thing is, we know lots of men and women through the centuries have done that. They have given their lives. Martyrs of all types go way, way back, Jewish and Christian. And so many, 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 many human people have acted courageously, valiantly, honorably, sacrificially. So that Jesus did it doesn't make him unique. There's got to be more. But we can start there. We can say, dang, that's pretty impressive. That's an example that I would want to elevate and show people. This is the greatest act of human love, that a man would give his life for another. But the divine action, what's that? Where does the salvation come? It does not come until there's a resurrection. It is God raising Jesus from the dead. Paul says that proclaimed him as Son of God. Hebrews has a sense that Jesus is not necessarily perfected in the sense of, he was a 10-year-old boy one time. Now, I don't care what you say and how perfect the Son of God was. 10-year-old boys are naughty. They're just going to be naughty. So the idea that Jesus had some kind of he was the perfect child, meaning he never gave his parents any trouble. He never had to be corrected. He never told them what lie to keep himself out of trouble. No, he did all that, or he's not human. But that's not sin. That's growing up. That's just human learning. That's having the community, having to shape this wild feral animal into something civil. 10-year-old boys are really feral. I had a couple of them here that were here last night, so I kind of emphasized this part. But Jesus was 10 years old too. So that's not what we're talking about when we talk about his perfection. Actually, the writer of the Hebrews says that he was perfected through his suffering. And Paul says he was proclaimed Son of God because of his resurrection. Now we kind of, solidify that, make it all simplified, and yeah, he previously existed, he came, he's gone, he's now in heaven. But the real act of being here looked all human. And seeing the action of God in a crucifixion takes a heck of a lot of faith, and nobody saw it. Nobody saw that was God's plan when it was happening. It was a tragic interruption of God's plan in their minds. If he hadn't said these kinds of things to them, they would have all been just utterly destroyed. There would be no Christian church. if Jesus was not raised from the dead. He would have just been a famous Jewish rabbi otherwise. Do you get that? He would have been a famous Jewish rabbi who was martyred. Instead, we claim that he's done this. His victory is over death. And that is what John considers to be the ruler of this world, the fear of death. If the fear of death is removed, if the assurance of acceptance is given, if eternal life, however vaguely I might be able to imagine it, is a hope for me, then my life takes on a whole new meaning. It takes on a meaning that I live on the grace of God. I'm connected to this eternal flow of life, and my seed is going to die and the husk is going to dissolve, but something is going to keep going. And it will be with Jesus. So he's not only lifted up from the earth in the cross, but he's lifted up from the earth in his resurrection. And we look upon that, however incredible it might seem. I mean, let's face it, all religious stories sound really strange to people who don't believe them. It's just true. But I've hitched my wagon to this hope, and I'm going to just keep it there because I ain't got anything better at this point. So my soul's troubled during Lent. My soul's troubled by my own alienation from God. I'm supposed to be a little disturbed by that and say, so what should I do to make that better? And how do I embrace the joy of what's about to be presented dramatically in Holy Week and come out of that Easter experience saying, I'm serving a living God who beloves you. He beloves us. He makes us beloved by his love. So here you go. We're headed towards this whole thing, the cross, the atonement, the resurrection, and I hope you're ready and I hope you'll participate. I hope this will stimulate perhaps your participation on Thursday and Friday night as we remember not just the triumphal entry but that Last Supper. Beautiful, beautiful experience. So Thursday and Friday night, 6:30, my little commercial break here. So God bless you all.